Hi, everyone. My name's Carol Pedersen, and welcome to today's series of Saxton's Meet the Author. Today's author speaker is David Knoff, and I am so excited to be talking to him about his book, 537 Days of Winter. Absolutely critical reading for all leaders in business, but actually for everybody on your team to read this as a leader so they can understand what you go through. Please join me in welcoming him. And I just finished your book at
Perfect.
5 o'clock this morning,
Yep.
and I, I read all the time, fiction, nonfiction, speakers' books, historical fiction, biographies. I've read a lot of books on leadership, David, and I'm not kidding.
Mhm.
This is critical for anybody leading a team to read. I also think that it's even more important that a team reads the book so they
Yep.
can have empathy and compassion for what it's like to be a leader. And
I
I
really
wanted
appreciate that. Cheers. Yeah.
it's so I wanted to start out by telling people that haven't read it yet, in your introduction, in telling his story, David illuminates for us an experience that all leaders face, the loneliness of command. And then in the beginning of the book, you talk about embracing failure and creating a culture where people feel they can make mistakes. But then as it progresses, you're in the middle, where it's like, oh, these mistakes are life and death.
Yeah.
And then in the end, the two compadres you had that kept you going, and Rhonda and the doc.
Yeah.
So I was just wanting to have you share with the people who are listening to this the ups and downs, the perils of leadership, the highs, the lows, the Freds in our business.
Yep.
One of the places we could start from is your mantra, which is right from the start. My mantra was to always seek the reasons behind mistakes and learn from them.
Absolutely. I say it in the talks as well. If you learn something, you didn't fail, and certainly along the way when you do make mistakes, that you just have to learn from them and move on and don't make the same mistake twice and just keep going.
And also, can you talk about how managing your emotions when you're in such close proximity with people for a long period of time?
Yeah, that was probably one of the toughest things in that on an Antarctic station or a space station or the moon or a mining camp or on a yacht or somewhere like that or a boat where you're working, living and working with your team is a really unique challenge for ship's captains have dealt with this for centuries and others as well. It's something that you can't get a break from ever, but you can never fully switch off from being the station leader. And same with no one in the team can ever switch off from their role. And that if you're sitting around chatting to the mechanics at night, someone will ask them a mechanical question and forget that, like, hey, we're relaxing, we're talking about something else rather than, hey, it's can I ask you work questions? And that became a really important thing for the team to hold those lines of after hours. We'd work from sort of 7:30 to 6 p.m. every day. But outside of those hours, dropping the work questions or at least caveating it with saying, oh, hey, excuse me, do you mind if I just ask a work question? Or them having the right to say, hey, just park that until tomorrow, put it on the whiteboard, put in an email, or come and see me tomorrow morning at the start of work and we'll deal with it, rather than just letting the whole thing meld together. And it was tough at times. I found when I was trying to relax, either in the gym or playing some music or sitting at the bar on a Friday night on station, I'd still get work questions and you'd have to just put your guard back up and remember that, okay, I can't just voice my own opinion on something here because that might get construed as the official message, and that takes its toll on you. And it was the only escape I found was talking to other station leaders either on the phone or via video call where I could, and they might be thousands of miles away or even back in Australia, having been a station leader in the past or something, to talk to them about the challenges and just vent my own frustrations and hearing from them that they're either dealing with the same problems at the other Australian Antarctic stations, or that it's an issue that those that had come before me had was often enough to help me get through and go, okay, great, these are standard problems in a ridiculous scenario, and we'll get through it.
And that would be Rick.
Yeah, so my main boss, the sort of head of operations at the Antarctic division, Rick, as he's named in the book. But to kind of talk to get into the weeds of the book, Rick, the character in the book, is actually a representation of 3 or 4 individuals who were my chain of command.
Okay.
He is based on one particular individual who wanted to remain nameless, so he changed his name. But those that know him know who he is. And at times, though, I was chatting to other members of, say, the head of aviation, and rather than have too many characters who were my boss in the book, we sort of consolidated that into one funnel of, okay, Rick's my boss.
Which is, I thought, was really helpful reading it. For as a leader in business, you need a mentor. You need someone who you can go to and feel comfortable asking for help, because it's important that your team sees you as, kind of under control and in charge.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, though, that I think, for 537 days of leading a team, you can't maintain the facade of you have all the answers and you know everything. And there's a huge part about being a modern leader that is that vulnerability and your ability to be approachable and relatable to your team, that they know that I was certainly struggling with the same challenges that everyone on station had. And I used to close almost every station meeting with the fact that, the statement that, we're all in the same boat, that we're all having challenges here. And when I had weeks or days or moments where I'd made bad decisions, or I'd snapped at someone, or I'd said something that got taken the wrong way, or just didn't work, admitting it and owning it and saying, hey, yeah, I'm having a really tough week, the same as everyone is, with grappling with either being extended, some of the other challenges we had on station, as you said, Fred's the character in the book, and it's based on absolute truth in terms of really pushed us all in terms of his attitude at times to certain elements and the challenges we had to face. He didn't always face them in the way that we expected someone to, but had to understand that, well, this isn't necessarily the individual, it's the circumstances we've all been put in that are pushing us to the limit. And of course you're going to have frustrations, and of course you're going to be wanting answers and wanting solutions that you want to control the scenario you're in. But of course we couldn't control how we got home, we couldn't control the world we were coming back to, and that became the biggest challenge of how do you deal with members of the team that aren't really doing that well with it all. And on some level of that spectrum, we were all challenged and we were all struggling. And it was, how do you bring that together and unify it? And my saying became, well, we're all in the same boat. It doesn't matter how well someone pretends they're doing with this challenge and the extension and COVID and the rest of it. We're all struggling in our own way. And it manifested in a lot of different ways down there.
I won't tell the whole story, but when you refer to overhearing Fred talking and that moment, and I seriously, when I was reading it, I was like, oh my gosh, that's like a brave example of vulnerability as a leader. Like, you just reached the limit.
Yeah.
And he was so frustrated and couldn't see a way out of, and getting beyond his frustration, that he literally quit.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, that scene, I think that was that's one of the most compelling scenes in the book, where that happens, and that scene, and that's almost word for word exactly what happened as well. That's one element of the book that is pretty much true to exactly what happened. And that was tough, because in the lead up to that, what's probably not covered in the book is we'd had so many conversations around like the operational reasons why we'd been extended, and the medical reasons of it's better to leave us isolated while that gives everyone back home and the medical community to develop vaccines and all these sorts of things, rather than just expose us to other people coming in, and a whole range of things that we'd been through as a team. But yet Fred, the character, hadn't accepted it and just couldn't accept it, and it just led to this frustration from myself and others around him. And then there was that one particular evening where he just was talking about being behind my back, but I was within earshot, so I heard it and made a decision to go and sort of just, rather than walk away or just let him vent to his mate at the bar, I'm like, no, I've got to nip this in the bud, or try and take this on, and just went in there and sat down, and we had it out with a pretty good argument over the scenario. And I again explained why why the circumstances had led to us being extended, and the fact that they couldn't just come and get us, and we didn't have the right aviation or maritime assets to be able to do it. And that meant the safest thing for everyone to go home safely was to stay a little bit longer, while the logistics could be sorted out into the year after. And we still had a very heated discussion, but in some ways we both probably needed to do that. And then it was a real challenge to reset that relationship afterwards. But we did sit down a few days later and talk through the realities of the challenges we'd faced and where we were going, and that we both wanted to work it out and find a way to get through to the end and change some of his role on station and help him deal with it. Because I did empathise with his situation, but at the same time, how do we get you to understand and get on board with reframing this and finding some opportunity in the chaos and the crisis that we were in to make the most of it, rather than continue complaining. And it was really difficult to unpack on both sides, but something that in the end we had it out and we were able to reset the relationship afterwards.
Amazing story. Also, when you shift from everything's going really well and then COVID, how can you describe what that was like, and say like the first 72 hours where you knew you weren't going to be going back on time?
Yeah,
what was the scariest part about that?
The scariest part is, so we were told on the 23rd of June 2020, so 2 days after the midwinter dinner where we celebrated that, we're past the halfway point, we'd be going home in a couple of months and that'd be it. And we were told, hey, there's no flights, there's no ships this season, you're gonna have to stay for a second summer and we'll come and get you sometime in early 2021. And I trusted that at face value and knew the operational elements around it, and I'd been involved in the planning, so I kind of knew that was coming. But part of me at that point, and if you cast your mind back to June 2020 and where you thought 2020 was going and where it ended up going and what rolled into 2021 and all the other aspects, it dawned on me a few days after we'd been told that, well, what if this gets worse? What happens if this turns into staying for another winter? And the title of the book's 537 Days of Winter. If we'd been extended into another winter season in Antarctica, the book would be entitled something 800 Days of Mutiny, Madness and Chaos in Antarctica, because it would have gotten pretty messy in that second year. And it was something that crossed my mind of, wow, if the pandemic gets worse or they can't get an icebreaker or there's another variant that causes the whole thing to reset, are we going to stay here even longer, and what's going to happen? And that was something that we all knew in the back of our minds could have happened, and scared us beyond belief in terms of, wow, dealing with the extension as it was tough enough. If it had gone into another winter, it would have been pretty rough.
Plan for everything so nothing is a surprise. Embrace chaos and uncertainty.
Yeah.
Make everything a lesson, especially failure. And my personal favorite, imagine what looking back will look like. And talk a bit about those things that you quoted learning as a leader.
Yeah, something that dawned on me again after we got the news that we're going to be extended, and as a number of other things evolved and it got tougher and tougher and harder to get out of bed every day, when you just knew that you weren't going to enjoy it, you're not going to have fun, and even with even your highs, I think I say in the book, the highs became briefer and the lows became longer. That even when you did something you enjoyed, you're like, oh, that was fun, but now I've got to go back to work, and like, it just became this endless grind, similar to lockdowns and everything that everyone had back here. But what helped me was to look at it and go, well, what's this going to be like when we get home? And we will get home. Just have that faith that this will end and I'll be back in Australia. Will I look back and say I did everything I could to get that team home safely and make the most out of the experience and the opportunities we had and the unique situation we were in? Of like and almost to say, how lucky am I to get this challenge to lead a team through such a ridiculous set of circumstances that you can't, you could go to Harvard and do your MBA, or you could be a CEO of a company, and if it all goes well, you go, well, great, like whoop-de-doo. But what you want as a leader is to really get tested and pushed to your absolute limits and know that you can do it. And that was what started to cross my mind of like, all right, well, regardless of how this feels, and it certainly felt chaotic and it felt like we were failing it many, many times along the way, to just go, you know what, when this is all over, I'm going to look back and know that if I can say, hand on my heart, all I did was work as hard as I could to try and solve every problem and take the group forward and do everything I could to influence it in a way that they get the most out of it and they go home safely, then that's it. And you can be proud of your achievements at the end. And I certainly did have daydreams about doing podcasts, about a book, about being stuck in Antarctica. It would cross my mind of like, maybe that's something that I'll do when I get home. And finally, when I did get back to Australia, it was a process to help myself initially of like, all right, I'm going to write about this and tell people the story. And that was something I started to reframe down there as well, was, all right, the lessons I'm going to learn and the team are going to learn through this will be worth it, because people will want to hear this story when we get home. And myself and other members of the team get out and about, tell the story and tell people what it was like to miss out on the pandemic and live through an extended Antarctic season.
And I'm not going to share it, but the Christmas miracle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Massive.
Yeah.
Absolutely massive.
Yeah. I mean, I could happy to talk about it a little bit. So we did have to do I think it's even mentioned in the foreword of the book, or I've talked about it on TV as well, the medical evacuation we had to do on Christmas Eve 2020. And that was one of the most operationally audacious and complex things I'd ever been involved in my entire career. And
probably ever will be.
And probably ever will, or hopefully ever will be. And yet, when it was all said and done, it was Christmas, and we'd achieved something incredible as a team. And that team was not just the 24 of us on station, but the Australian Antarctic Program and a number of other stations and the Chinese and American programs that helped us do that evacuation. Yet, when it was all done, we just sort of went, all right, we'll do a bit of a Christmas lunch, but we wouldn't do, there was nothing to celebrate. It wasn't like a victory. It was just this flat kind of, all right, cool, we did that, amazing, but back to work. And we never really had a chance to celebrate it. And it certainly didn't feel like a victory, because, you know, it was the circumstances of the medical evacuation, so I can't really go into the details, but it had this weird overtone. Yet looking back on it now, people often read that chapter or they hear the story and they go, what the actual hell, how did you do that? And all these things, but it happened so fast. And I was almost on autopilot for 10 days to get that done. And I can still remember it very vividly. And I that was actually the first chapter of the book I wrote, because it was so easy to write in terms of, you just remember exactly what happened. I've got really detailed notes and diary entries and everything from that time. And the operational aspects of it are very, very precise in terms of the aviation risks and everything that were all documented to make sure. So it makes it easy to write a chapter about an emergency, given the amount of paperwork and process in dealing with something so complicated.
So I always like to read a passage from the book. Are you okay if I do that?
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is in the chapter called The Christmas Miracle. Those who slept woke to our second Christmas Eve on station, while the patient and Fred were now home safe and well in Australia and would spend holidays with their families. A bittersweet emotion of success and despair hung in the air. Christmas Mark II would be a low-key affair, an experience so unique that I struggled to describe it. As we sat down for dinner, no one really wanted to be there. Everyone wanted to be home and should have been home. But here we were, sharing another Christmas as a family of isolated and exhausted expeditioners. Few would ever know the feelings we experienced that day, and few leaders would ever experience the challenges and obstacles I'd had to overcome during these weeks to ensure success and make it happen. Even though the Medivac had been successful and professionally, it was the most dynamic and audacious operation I'd ever been involved in. I was flat. I was torn, and I felt more alone than ever as I shared a quiet drink with Doc, as the only other man on station who knew the whole story of what just had happened and what it had taken to achieve the impossible. We sat in silence alone at Nina's. We turned to each other and raised our glasses. Merry Christmas, Doc. Merry Christmas indeed, replied Doc, and our glasses clinked. I loved this.
Yeah, that still gets me. I still remember those moments, and I've never heard someone read that to me. Yeah, that's exactly how it was, and we just sat there, and myself and the doctor sat there in silence, knowing exactly what had happened, and the rest of the team, we all dealt with it in our own way. We did have a family dinner that day, and yeah, and I still remember what I said to the team that day as well, about it. So it was interesting. Yeah, sorry, you got me.
No, I just wanted, that's how I always end, is reading a passage. And there were several I could have read, but once I got to that one, I was like, oh no, this is the one I'm going to read. But I
Yeah.
just really want to say thank you so much for joining me. But most importantly, thank you for writing this book. I'm going to tell every human being I see that they need to read it, especially people in business.
No, thank you very much. And I think one thing that really surprised me about the book now is how relatable it is to so many other challenges that people dealt with in the last couple of years, that you'd be surprised how similar what you went through as families in lockdown, as businesses, as sporting clubs and everyone, and what everyone went through in the last few years compared to what happened on an Antarctic station. You'll be very, very surprised how similar what you dealt with was to our predicament down there.
Thank
Thank
you
you
so
very
much.
much.
It was
Buy the
such a
book
pleasure.
in all good bookstores.
All right, David, take it easy. Have a good weekend.
You too. Thank you.
Cheers.